In this lecture, we're talking about the Mongolian Empire and then later the dynasty that the Mongolian Empire will create in China. But first things first, let's begin the Mongolian Empire. The Mongols were a people in sort of, present day Mongolia, right up there above China, and they're, a nomadic people. They will, they will raid cities and settled towns when they sort of need extra food. And, so they've got a real sort of warlike, culture, because that's one of the things that they need to do to survive is take things from other people. You see up above you here some people, like modern day people, reenacting sort of how they would fight. Into that situation, you get one of history's more interesting characters, Genghis Khan, whose name when he was born wasn't Genghis Khan. That's more like a title that he earns later on. His name, as best as I understand, is like Temujin or something like that. So that's who he is from the start, and then later on he becomes this great Genghis Khan, and he really does. He starts from a very sort of low point. His dad was like a chief, but he got killed when he was young, so he's on his own, right? Comes up and becomes this sort of chief, this head of the Mongols, and then devotes himself to just conquering everybody, and goes forth and does that. And he's conquering, Asia, Central Asia, expanding his empire outwards till the day he dies. And his descendants after him do the sort of same thing. And at the end of the day, the Mongolian Empire is the largest land empire in history, a record that's never been beaten. So we're not counting sort of the Japanese Empire in World War II. We're not counting things that have ocean involved. But if you're just measuring, square footage conquered, the Mongolians won the title back in the 1200s and retain it to this day. So they conquer a lot. And they are going to just wreak havoc on a lot of the different people that we've been studying. They're going to conquer the Abbasid dynasty, which we discussed back in chapter 6. They are going to conquer China. Well, you see on the map over there, right? They just conquer everywhere. Genghis Khan today, we're not going to discuss him for the rest of the lecture because, he dies. But Genghis Khan, even today, is a revered figure in Mongolia, in the nation of Mongolia. You see over there Mongolian money. And who do they have on their money? But of course, the most famous Mongolian in the history of Earth, Genghis Khan. The Mongolian conquest of China is finally realized by Genghis Khan's grandsons, or rather one of his many, many grandsons, Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan finishes the sort of takeover of China, takes down the Song dynasty, and founds the new Chinese dynasty, the Yuan dynasty. He moves the capital to Beijing, a city that you might know today, very famous and sort of current capital of China today. Kublai Khan moves the capital there, and he rules over China, but while the Yuan dynasty is in power, the Mongols are able to sort of keep their cultural identity. They're able to keep themselves sort of separate from Chinese people who they sort of consider different. They're ruling at this point, so they consider themselves better, right? So the Mongols were the rulers, and they're ruling over China, and there's way more, Chinese people in China than there are Mongols in China, but they were able to sort of keep themselves in the elite, and they didn't intermingle, or at least didn't intermingle much. So they sort of kept themselves distant until the dynasty falls, which of course it does. They get corrupt, they get extravagant, they stop paying attention to what's important, and they go down, of course. But the important things, the distinctive things that I'd like you to remember, that they're founded by Kublai Khan, one of the grandsons of Genghis Khan, and that their rule is sort of characterized by the Mongols holding themselves in a different sort of status than the Chinese. Also, this is the time during Kublai Khan, during the Yuan dynasty, that the Venetian merchant Marco Polo travels there. He travels there, he visits there, he's there for many years, and then later in life he writes this, story about all of his time in China, and it becomes popular in Europe because The Europeans at this point are going through the Dark Ages. Their knowledge of China is not, it's a lot of myths and stuff, like it's very imperfect. Marco Polo, was there and has a lot of knowledge to spread. But what was interesting is his stories to Europeans going through the Dark Ages were just so unbelievable that many didn't buy it. Many were just like, oh, nice fantasy book, but this is not, whatever, this is not real. You can see the list sort of down there that, the Chinese were having garbage collection and they, would bathe regularly. They were doing stuff that a medieval European was just out of the realm of possibility. It seemed like it was just, crazy science fiction. It's not real. And the Chinese had sort of that level of sophistication, while again, Europe is at this low point. And Marco Polo, really was there and really was, telling the story of that at this point. So I want now to sort of step away from the Yuan dynasty for a second just to go over this important cultural change that's going on in China that it was tough to sort of squeeze in anywhere else. So during the heyday of the Silk Road, when commerce is really flowing between all the different parts of Asia, many practitioners of Buddhism come to China and it becomes quite popular. During the Tang Dynasty, Buddhism is quite ascendant in China and it's becoming just very, very popular there. Until one of the Tang emperors, because he sort of needed some money, and the Buddhist monks were sort of a convenient scapegoat because it was sort of seen, at least in some circles, as like a foreign religion, right? A religion that sort of came from somewhere else. This emperor seized a bunch of different monasteries, which was important because the monasteries had money, and he seized them and took their money, right? He seized them and sort of took all their stuff, closed them down, and this was accompanied by this sort of propaganda campaign of like, oh, these people are no good. This whole thing is no good. These people are from somewhere else. They're not us, and just all that was sort of intermixed. So there were harsh, ruthless sort of political reasons for this, but then there was also this sort of cultural intolerance all mixed up in that, and even though the official sort of smackdown on Buddhism, backed off a little bit shortly afterwards from a historical point of view. Buddhism never recovered in China to what it was. Buddhism never got back to that point of being this very big, very influential religion in China. It's still, even today, is a very important part of Chinese culture. There are quite a few Buddhists there. Buddhism is sort of quite intertwined in the culture. But again, I just want to sort of emphasize that it was, trying, I guess, at least to rival, Confucianism as like the thing in China. And, Confucianism, along with sort of some political help, sort of batted it down from there so that Confucianism was able to sort of hold on to the title, and Buddhism was a lesser influence in China ever after. As I think I discussed in the last lecture, the invention of printing in China really helps to make popular writing, to make writing and literature more popular because you're able to print, books and collections of poems and stuff way quicker. And so more people are able to enjoy, stuff that they enjoy. It brings literature into its own as a form of popular art. And China was just sort of really important in those first steps of literature becoming a popular art form. Art also flourishes during this time. You see some examples and examples over there. And poetry, there's some of the poetry that is very well respected from this time are poets by Li Bo and his friend, I forget his friend's name, but the poem by Li Bo that you see underneath me here is apparently a very, very, very famous Chinese poem, and one that I guess many Chinese students are expected to memorize in like elementary sort of school. This is like one of the introductory poems that Chinese students will be taught in their language arts classes in, elementary, sort of middle school. I don't know, so some sort of young age. This is one of the first things that they're introduced to in terms of poetry. It's supposed to be this beautiful example of imagery and poetryness. So this is just sort of a snapshot of, again, the art that is going on at the time, the literature that's going on at the time, and again, all of this is made more available to everybody by those guys up there working hard at the printing press.